Hello, and welcome to Create and Do with Andrew Chiu, the podcast. Thanks for sticking with us. We're going to episode 3. I hope you've had a good week and that you enjoyed the last 2 parts with Mark Lindsay. We're going to try to launch these on Mondays. So, episode 3. Today we talked to Chris Bavota. You might know him as one half of the filmmaking duo, along with Lee Paula Springer, behind the hit film Dead Dicks, which won the award for Best Canadian Feature in 2019 at the Fantasia Film Festival. And how I know Chris is actually he came to the Toronto International Film Festival, TIFF, in 2018, and a lot of my filmmaking friends here are actually originally from Montreal, so he was just, among the people that I met through my friends. Talking to him and Lee, I knew that they were into horror movies. And this was all before Dead Dicks was even a project on anyone's mind. So I didn't actually know Chris that well before we did this chat. But I thought this was a great story about sticking to your guns. Some of it I couldn't even believe. I was like, so really, listening to Chris's story made me even more happy for him and Lee and the success they've had with Dead Dicks, which is available in multiple countries like the US, UK, Canada, Russia, South Korea, Benelux countries, in Europe, which is super cool. All right, so here's the first part of my chat with Chris Bavota. Okay, we are recording.
Are you gonna add like an intro later type thing once you figure out all that stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I think I will. Like, this is just like getting the people.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I don't really know any better way of recording than like this app I have on the phone.
No, it's fine. I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah. It sounds okay, but I figure just more the content or whatever. And
Yeah.
so your name is Bavota, right? How do you say it?
Bavota. Yeah. Bavota.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if it was like Bavota or something. I wasn't
Yeah, it's
sure.
Bavota. What's so funny is that almost everybody I know pronounces it differently. And I've been introduced at film festivals as Bavota, Bavado, Bovoto.
That's pretty. So wait, I've actually never heard that name before. Is there like an origin?
Yeah, so the origin is Italian. Well, I'm not sure what the origin is, but my family's background is Italian. So my parents were born in Italy and they both moved to Canada when they were young and they were raised mostly here. But my grandparents and my supposedly great grandparents, I guess, were all from the northeastern region of Italy.
Oh, northeastern. Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's like very different than like the other
Yeah.
regions.
Yeah, so like my family, I have like grayish eyes. My mother has green eyes. My grandfather had blue eyes. We're like light skinned, light or pale skinned, light eyes, light hair type Italians.
Right.
Hmm.
As someone who has dark eyes, dark hair, blah blah
Hmm.
blah, I'm very
Hmm.
jealous.
Well, well, I guess it all depends. I grew up in an actual Italian neighborhood, but no one ever believed that I was Italian. So I often got kind of like neglected amongst groups of people because they would never try to include me in things because they didn't think that I came from the same culture.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that always happens. It's like,
Hmm.
I mean, even actually, I had a boss who was from Mexico, and like he was, dark hair tan by that point when he was in his 40s or whatever. But then he
Hmm.
actually showed me photos of when he was like 20, and he was
Hmm.
actually like super blonde.
Hmm.
And he's like, yeah, and then later in life, it changed for him.
Oh, yeah. I was born blonde and my hair went kind of more to a dark brown in my early teens. And I have 2 daughters, and the eldest daughter, Abby, she's 8 now. She has blonde hair and kind of grayish eyes like me. But then my other daughter, Margot, has brown eyes and brown hair, which is more similar to my wife. But yeah, we don't know if Abby's gonna stay blonde or if she'll do what I did, which was kind of go dark brown in the teenage years. So we'll see.
Right. You gotta
Mhm.
record it for posterity.
Yeah, like I'll do a picture every year and then like do that morphing.
Yeah, and then you can put it in a movie or something.
True enough.
It's like, what happened to this character?
Well, when my wife was pregnant with our my first daughter, Abby, I took a picture of her every day standing like sideways.
Mhm.
So I then animated her like belly growing.
Oh,
Yeah, it
okay.
was pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. Like,
Yeah.
how many photos did it end up being?
I
Like,
only did one a day, so it was really just like the 9 months divided into the days. I missed a few days here and there. It turned
right, right,
into like a
right.
2 minute, I think,
Yeah, I
maybe
bet.
2 to 3 minute video, you know?
That would be a cool, like, if you can print like 10 of them or nine of them for each
Yeah.
month or something.
Mhm.
Like,
I think if I was way more, like professional, I guess, I would have had a setup that was like, make sure she was in the exact same position, wearing the exact same clothes, with
right.
the exact same lighting every single day. So it was more like animation as opposed to this jumpy thing. Like when you watch it, it's just this jumpy collection of images, you know?
But I kind of like stuff like that for me. Like, despite having been called a perfectionist by a friend
Mhm.
and person I've worked with, I was like, I never see myself as a perfectionist. And I kind of like leaving things a little imperfect.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I don't know why. Like, it's just
Mhm.
like, I don't know, it kind of gives it more life or something.
For
Like if
sure.
you,
There's something I think that was lost in like stop motion animation when you no longer could see the fingerprints in the clay, you know?
oh, did that happen really?
Oh, for sure. Things are a lot smoother now. Like when you watch some of the Leica stop motion films, like Kubo and the Two Strings, stuff like that, it's mostly 3D printed heads that get swapped
Oh,
in and out, right?
right.
Whereas in the old days, it wasn't really stop motion as much as it was claymation, right? And so it was clay, and people were modifying the sculptures of the faces to change the expressions and stuff like that. So you did see fingerprints on a lot of the characters and stuff.
Right. Oh, okay. That is
Mm. So much is done that way now because it's faster and cheaper. So before you used to have to make molds, like you'd have to make the mold, cast the mold, do the reverse, then, create whatever it is you were actually creating inside that. So it's a process. Now you can literally design it on your computer and print it out. And you can print out exact copies, multiples type thing.
right.
So with the stop motion stuff, some of those characters in those movies have hundreds of heads printed and painted with different expressions. And that's why some of the films now seem to be so much more advanced in the animation. But it's because they have this new technique of 3D printing where they could actually really get precise with the details on the face, right? With when the people speak, the expression in the eyes, the wrinkles, all that stuff.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. I never even realized that shit.
Mhm. I only
Every,
know it because I saw behind the scenes. It's not like I'm that much more aware of it. I
yeah,
just
yeah,
saw the
yeah,
behind the
yeah.
scenes.
I know, I know. No, I mean, you have kids, so it's like you have to watch
Yeah.
those movies, whereas I don't.
Mhm. Mhm.
I watch the Criterion Collection, which like probably puts your kids to sleep.
Well, no, but the Fantastic Mr. Fox is on Criterion, and the behind the scenes of that, he does talk about the seeing some of the kind of like handling in the film where you can tell that a person just touched the puppet, right, to change the placement. There's like a tactile feeling to that movie that doesn't exist with a lot of other stop motion.
Okay, yeah.
Mm,
I haven't seen it in a while. I actually have that disc, so I actually should go
mm,
back
mm,
and watch it now. I haven't seen it in like years.
mm.
Oh, that's cool. I like this discussion. I'm putting it in. Fuck it.
Mhm.
Okay, now I'm just going to introduce you. I'm
Sure.
with Chris Bavota, not
Mhm.
pronounced any other way, um, whose first feature film, Dead Dicks, premiered at Fantasia, I think,
Mhm.
almost a year ago now. It's July.
Yeah, it was a year ago, July 25th.
Oh, crazy. Yeah, it's the fourth now. So, yeah,
Mm.
so 3 weeks. So it's been 49 weeks since you premiered.
Yeah. Oh, what's crazy is the official Blu-ray, DVD, VOD release is going to be on July 28th. So it was almost like a full year since it premiered to the day it's coming out for everybody else.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
That is that's trippy. I mean, like that's
Yeah, it's
also very
crazy.
unheard of. It's amazing, but like usually you don't hear that, you know? So like that's so amazing.
Yeah, we were really lucky. Like we did not have distribution at the premiere. We didn't really have anything. We literally finished the movie the day before it premiered. We were still editing and tweaking things, and then even since the premiere, we went back and redid some of the sound. So it was still kind of evolving. And depending on when you saw the film, you might have seen it with a completely different soundtrack. One was stereo, one was 5.1, one had a complete redo of the Foley. So if you saw it at Fantasia, you saw one version. If you saw it in Manchester, you saw another version. If you saw it in Toronto, you saw even another version.
Right. And so then one day you'll have the Criterion 10 disc.
Yeah, right. Well, hopefully the ones that come out on DVD will all be the same.
Oh man, that would be funny. I actually I did go to a screening of the Toronto premiere of my short with all these other shorts.
Hmm.
And then after they showed the short, it was like me and two other filmmakers, they're doing Q&A. And the first thing that one of the filmmakers says is, yeah, that was an old version of the movie. I don't know how you
Yeah,
got that.
yeah.
Like that, no one's looked at that for like 6 months. I don't know how you
Hmm.
got a hold of that.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
you never know.
you never know. We had a screening in Boston that somehow they got sent a version of the film that had some bad visual effects. And so, like when we rendered one version of the film, like one visual effect right near the end, for some reason, all of the parameters that were set in the software were reset to like the default. And so the default version of the effect ended up creating this kind of like spiral in the center of the movie. And that version screened in Boston. And Lee Springer, my wife and co-director, and our lead actress Jillian Harris, and even Heston Horwin, our lead actor, all went down to Boston to watch that version of the film. And Lee was horrified. She was so stressed out that that was the version that was playing, and there's really nothing we could do about it. At that point, it's kind of like too late in the game to do anything.
Oh, they figured it out before the screening.
We figured out that that was going to be the version because there were slight differences, and we figured that out very quickly. And there was nothing we can do about it. So I'm sure there are a lot of festivals where within the first 5 minutes, you see the filmmaker jump up and run to the projection booth because they're just like, no, 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 that's the wrong version that you're playing.
And was that festival, like, did you need to send a DCP or something like that?
Yeah, I think we had sent. I can't remember. It wasn't a DCP. It might have just been like one of the ProRes type files.
Ah,
But
okay.
when you're a lot of times with film festivals, distributors, sales agents, like you have so many different versions floating around. We ended up so when we showed it at Fantasia, we didn't have a distributor, we didn't have a sales agent. But then by the time we played in Manchester, which I think was maybe 2 or 3 months afterwards, we had signed on with a sales agent. And so, of course, they put their logo in front of it, and then they release that version to be screened at different festivals. And then they go out and they try and sell it. And then we sold it to a couple of different distributors around the world. And finally, in the United States, we got Artsploitation on board. And then in Canada, we got Raven Banner. So they each put their logo onto the film, and then other versions go out there. And so sometimes along the way, a bad version, kind of like slips into the mix.
Oh, okay, because
Yeah.
you're not putting their logo on, like they're just taking your
Yeah,
file
they're
and
doing it, right?
right.
And usually it's fine, but once in a while, also it's our fault because we kept tweaking the film after we had screened it, right? So we wanted to make sure as we went to different festivals and we screened it, we saw different problems. And so we kept trying to fix those problems along the road, and that's the reason why a lot of different versions were kind of floating around.
Right, yeah, okay.
So the problems of independent filmmaking at this level, like we had no money to make the movie, and we had a lot of help from a lot of people. But because you often have no, when you have no money, often people kind of just are helping you when they can, and they can't dedicate a lot of time, give you a lot of resources. They just do what they can when they can. And what usually ends up, suffering the most is post production and sound and stuff like that. So we kept tweaking our sound mix as we went from festival to festival, just because we never had enough time and enough money to really do a decent job of it. The people who worked on the sound mix, they were great. They were so helpful. But like creating a stereo mix and then creating a 5.1 mix and then creating just like a music and a Foley track, it's like so time consuming, so complicated, and requires so much expertise that it's difficult to do through favors. It's difficult to do with a little bit of money, and we did our best, and everybody did amazing on our film. But sometimes still, like there's always something you're always like you're gonna notice when you're watching it, when you're listening to it. And we tried to tweak that as we were going, and we shouldn't have. We should have just kind of like sat with it, and that was that. But by tweaking it here and there, we really kind of got too much happening and too many different versions kind of floating around.
Right, right. But then you got, the best version of the film in the end.
Of course, like now that it's going to be coming out on Blu-ray and DVD, I'm glad we did those tweaks because we fixed a lot of things that irritated us when we saw the movie. And there's still little things, of course, that are always going to bother us. But right now we feel like, oh, it's a good version, even though it was made for no money, and it was kind of like a passion project for a lot of people. It stands up, as a legitimate film that's going to have a legitimate release.
Exactly. It's going to be on someone's bookshelf. Mine, for
Mm,
one, and then other
hopefully.
people, So, like,
Mm.
do you know how many they're going to, like, how big the run is? I don't know, like, because, like,
I have
physical market is so different now.
Yeah, I really don't know. I don't understand a lot of that side of it anymore. Years ago, I used to own a video store, and so I was really on top of distribution for DVDs. It was way before Blu-rays came out, so it was right when DVDs came out. So yeah, like I worked with a lot of small distribution companies, and sometimes they only printed 1,000 discs, and they would reprint as they would sell. Sometimes 5,000. Of course, major studios are putting out tens of thousands at a time, but a lot of the smaller distribution companies were just doing small runs. And
Right,
that's why
yeah.
sometimes you had movies like you could buy a regular DVD for $20 at Future Shop or Best Buy or Walmart. But to get some of these more obscure titles, they were like 40, 50, $60 because when you make smaller runs, they cost more money to manufacture.
Right, yeah, like when they're doing like 50,000, like the 50,000 month only cost them like 20 cents or something.
Exactly, yeah. It's still a couple bucks, but it's way cheaper than $10 a pop.
Right, right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's true. Especially, yeah, if you're only like doing 1,000 or something. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
even realize some of them were that low.
Yeah, well, even regular people, you didn't have to be a distributor back then to actually manufacture discs. There were companies all over Canada and tons in the United States where you could do pretty small runs. So I could make a movie shot on video, master it, get a DVD pressed of 500 units, and then hit up conventions and start selling them myself. And I think there was a lot of companies back then at the dawn of the DVD era that were doing that. They were just making low budget movies shot on video, distributed on DVD, sold through conventions or mail order or the internet when it was kind of like just starting out. And a lot of these small distribution companies found success and profit that way.
And now I think it's more consolidated. I think I've heard there's only like
Hmm.
one Blu-ray manufacturer in like North America now, and it's in like
It's
Mexico.
possible. Yeah, I don't really know. I haven't actually tried to press a disc myself for at least a decade. Like I did it back in the day. We made some short films and tried to like make it look pretty legit when we handed it out to promote ourselves. But I haven't done that in a while. I haven't even like my computer hasn't had a disk drive in 5 years, 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I bought extra external drives just in case. I'm
Yeah.
just like, in case these things, you know, can't even open things anymore in a
Hmm.
few years. I mean, I think
Yeah.
David, yeah.
You know, continue. Sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say David Fincher, I think, used to talk about that. I was thinking it was partially a joke, but he was like,
Hmm.
they would have to put one of those players back in the 90s with they were archiving their work because it's like,
Hmm.
who the hell knows what you're going to play your archive on in 20
Yeah.
years?
Well, that's why as technology advances, right, and different formats come out, there's always like a competition as to which is going to win. So back in the day, we had mini disc,
Hmm.
DATs, all kinds of things were coming out around the time of the CD.
Zip disks.
Yeah, like jazz drives, all that
Oh
kind of stuff, right?
yeah.
And then what won out? The CD won out because it was so versatile. You could use it for music, play it on a CD player. You could put it in a computer, back things up on it. And it's the one that survived all the way through, as opposed to like, yeah, I recorded music back in the day on like a jazz drive. I bought some kind of weird 8-track that recorded on that type of disc. And then within a year or two, there was nothing I could get to play that disc.
Oh, already. Wow.
Yeah, it moved quick.
Oh my God. Yeah. I
Hmm.
guess. Yeah. Well, even like you know that game Aliens versus Predator? I don't know if you ever
Hmm.
played it on
Yeah, yeah.
PC. We actually used to install it at our computers at school and play it on the LAN.
Nice.
I actually still have the CD, but it was just on sale on like
Hmm.
Steam or something or some,
Hmm.
online thing for like $2. And so people
Yeah.
started talking about it. And then, I was like, oh man, like I would love to play this game. This game was awesome. And then people were like, yeah, but you kind of can't anymore that well because, like certain things for the graphics were written for
Hmm.
this one thing that was out at the time.
Yeah.
And so, and I was like, shit, that's true. Like I remember those things.
Yeah.
I mean, but you don't realize that these things are just going to go away one day.
Hmm. Well, that's why you actually, if you created software or a game or anything that worked 10 years ago, you could try and load it up now. It might not work. Whenever they like companies are trying to re-release stuff on, the Nintendo Switch or the PS4, sometimes they have to totally recode the entire game, right,
Right,
to
right.
make it work. I remember same thing. I had purchased this game called Undying. It was a Clive Barker horror game for the PC.
I remember that
And
actually.
yeah, I got it in one of those bargain bins for like $3.99. Bought it, went home with it, slipped that CD-ROM disc into my computer, and as soon as it loaded up, the entire game was in fast forward.
Oh,
Like as soon as I went to move the character just like launched across. It moved so quickly because my
right,
processor was now so fast, and the game was probably 5 years old or more at the time.
right.
And so the computer was like a supercomputer compared to the one that it was designed for. And so I couldn't even play it.
That's funny. That
Hmm.
actually happened to me too.
Hmm.
Except it was actually an advantage.
Yeah.
So I used to play this game called Death Track, and
Okay.
literally on those old like 5.5-inch floppies,
Hmm.
and it was on like like 3 or 4 floppies or whatever.
Yeah.
But then yeah, when I got a new computer a few years later, and then you can just fit it on one of those small 3-inch A drive things,
Hmm.
then I was like, oh great, I can play the game and it'll probably be better now because my computer's faster. And then
Hmm.
exactly what you're saying. So like it's a racing game. So
Yeah.
then all of a sudden you're going super fast and you finish the whole race in like 30 seconds and you can't even control it because like it's just like you literally could not steer at all.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess in that case it helped because then you just finished the race really fast.
Yeah.
That is so funny. That's why I actually
Yeah.
really love some of the emulator projects happening.
For sure.
Like
It's great that we don't lose out on a lot of this stuff, that someone's archiving it. And the fact that we could archive it in a way where it's still playable, viewable. It's like taking, you know, all of those movies on VHS that haven't yet made it to DVD or even Blu-ray. Now there are small distribution companies that are coming out, finding, higher quality masters or negatives and doing 2K transfers to kind of make sure that these films or these TV shows or whatever are archived, because there are
Yeah.
some things that are lost. I think it was like Pee-wee's Playhouse or one of those shows from when I was a kid um, was only archived in the syndicated version, which means like when a show goes into syndication, they usually trim it down so that they could put more commercials in there.
Oh.
So when it originally aired, it might have been 24 minutes long, but when it goes into syndication, it's actually a 22-minute version or something like that. And so it happens to most TV shows, but the only version that was available to be remastered was that version, I think. I think it was either Pee-wee's Playhouse or Alf or one of those old kind of like sitcom shows or kids shows from the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Because we never really archived things back then. We never thought there would be longevity to that stuff. The syndicated version was the only version that really would continue on into existence because that was the one that people would buy, license, and then show,
Yeah, it was the only one that was worth money.
Yeah, so The Simpsons, a lot of those shows, the syndicated versions are edited.
I wonder which ones are on the DVD or whatever for The
I'm sure
Simpsons.
The Simpsons, like a lot of the newer shows, like shows that existed maybe in the 90s,
Yeah.
were archived in their original versions,
And I guess the tapes were cheaper then too.
Mm. And there was more access to it, like archiving stuff in the 70s and 80s was like in the 70s you archived it on film, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. I remember, I don't know if you ever watched those shows that were like when they were shooting in the studio, it's on video, and then when it's
Hmm.
outside, it's on film.
Yeah, the quality changes drastically.
Yeah, and like they always had those like video trails and like
Hmm.
highlights,
Hmm. Hmm.
which are like always hilarious. I love
Hmm.
those. Oh, that was a great
Hmm.
deviation. I love it.
Hmm.
Okay, let's go back to the very beginning.
Sure.
So, where were you born?
I was born in Montreal, so pretty much born and raised in Montreal. My family came to Canada from Italy in the 50s. So my parents were both born in the 40s. They showed up here early in their life. Like I think my dad was 6, my mom was 9. They came from two different kind of places in Italy. My mother, it's kind of a small village. My father's kind of a more of a city, but it was still very small. And they moved to Montreal and happened to buy houses like one block away from one another. So they ended up going to school together, meeting each other in their teenage years, and then getting married and, you know, live like I guess they also moved into a place close to their parents in Montreal. And so I ended up being born and raised here, close with my grandparents, close with my cousins, and my sister. I have an older sister. So I grew up in and around Montreal, in a
Which neighborhood in Montreal are you in? Because
well,
I spent a lot
my
of time there.
yeah, my family was in NDG,
Oh,
and
okay.
then my father and mother ended up moving from NDG to a suburb called LaSalle, which is only about 15 minutes away from NDG. And so, but my grandparents stayed there, so I spent a lot of time there with my grandparents and my cousins. But my sister and I, we grew up in LaSalle, went to school there, elementary school, high school, and I was pretty much living with my parents up until the day I turned 20, when I decided to move across the country to Vancouver. Because I had read in a magazine that the film and television industry in Vancouver was just exploding. And if you wanted to be involved in film and television, that was the place to be. But little did I know that the explosion that was happening in Vancouver was pretty much for American projects. So American television,
Like
American film.
X-Files.
Yeah, X-Files and Millennium and, everything else that was being shot out there at that time. Tons of movies were coming up there, tons of TV, but very little actual Canadian content being produced. So I moved out there and I ended up being in Vancouver for about 6 years and met a lot of great people, worked on a lot of interesting projects, but didn't really do a lot of my own things. but it led me to, some interesting deviations, I guess, like you said. And I ended up going to school to do makeup. I went to a school called Blanche McDonald for a year, and I got a degree or a certificate in makeup artistry because I wanted to do special effects. And it was right at the dawn too of digital effects, and a digital effects program was like $20,000, but a makeup effects program was only about $5,000. So I thought, oh, I like practical effects way more than I like digital effects. So like I'll do practical effects. And so I took this course, and then when I graduated, I only ended up doing about 1 month of practical special effects and like 10 months of beauty makeup. So I learned all about beauty, throughout the decades for film, television, fashion, all of that stuff. I ended up doing, like my sister's makeup for my nephew's baptism. I did some like wedding makeup. I did stuff like that. But in order to kind of go to the next level of special effects, I needed sculpting, I needed drawing, and I didn't have enough skills in those departments to ever make it to that next level, but I was not aware of that at the time. So I spent this year doing makeup, and when I graduated, I realized I can't really continue in the direction because I'm not really an artist.
Now,
So
you're right.
Sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh no, I was going to say, but did that help you? Were you able to use it?
So I used it a bit, but because I couldn't really take it to that next level, it just ended up being a skill that I added, to my portfolio, that if people wanted to. At Halloween, I was able to do some really cool makeup for my friends, but I only really ever worked on one TV show as kind of like an assistant for like the special effects makeup. And I had friends who had, like production houses out there that just did special effects, but I had technical knowledge, but not the artistic knowledge, so I couldn't really move forward in it. So if I would have known that the year prior, I maybe would have went into the digital effects path. And of course, 20 years later, now that I made my first feature film, I ended up teaching myself a bunch of digital effects. So it would have been smarter for me to do that back then, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so this was in the 90s, right? When you were in Vancouver?
Yeah, it was in 98. So I moved to Vancouver in 98. I started makeup, doing the makeup class in 99, graduated that in 2000. And
Yeah.
in between all that, I worked on a bunch of short films. I ended up working on some television shows, and I did some film as well. But I was either doing extra work or working in the art department. So I ended up getting more work in the art department, building sets and painting sets and stuff like that. And I did that for quite a few years, which led me to taking some time off, and I became a projectionist at a movie theater. Did that for a couple of years. Then I decided to open up a video store, and so I started my own video store. And so everything kind of led me to the next thing in Vancouver. And so like the last thing I did in Vancouver is I opened up this video store. I had that for about a year, and then I decided to just sell it to a friend, and I moved from Vancouver to Edmonton.
Edmonton.
Yes.
I sensed like a downbeat right there when you said yes.
Well, actually, to tell you the truth, Edmonton was great, but at the time, it was just, I don't want to say it was a step down or anything like that. It was just kind of like a step back, literally direction-wise, to Montreal. I'd gone as far as I could go to Vancouver, and then I started slowly making my way back to Montreal through the years, and that first step back was to Edmonton. So at the time, in Vancouver, I'd worked on some shows, worked at that movie theater, opened up that video store. I also helped a friend start a film festival out there that was called Cine Muerte, which was an international horror film festival, and kind of like the first of its kind, fully independent, and ended up going on for about 10 years.
Whoa.
And yeah, it was an amazing experience, a very rewarding festival, and I think it managed to introduce a lot of people out in Vancouver to some really wild and subversive cinema. And same thing with my video store. Like that was the whole purpose of the video store too, was to kind of bring that kind of weird cinema to Vancouver. And at the time, because DVD was just starting out, I was able to connect with a lot of distribution labels directly and bring some really weird stuff into that city. And met amazing people, people that are still friends with me today, people that I still interact with that were part of that community, that were worked on that film festival, or like helped out at my video store and stuff like that. Um, but back then in Vancouver, there were very few things that kind of focused on such subversive cinema. There were other video stores, of course, and there had been other film festivals too that kind of happened previous to Cine Muerte, but Cine Muerte really managed to like come out at a time when there was a bit more access to those types of things. The internet was kind of just really connecting people in a way that they couldn't connect before. And so it made that world smaller, and it managed to allow people to connect and films to be discovered that could not have been done at a different time, And so starting off in, I think it was 99 or 2000 was the first year of Cine Muerte. And the woman who started it out, Kayla Janice, she kept it going for I think a decade or more. And I only helped her out in the first year. And then I just started going to the festival as a fan after that. And I would help out here and there, maybe selling merchandise or like with, some graphic design stuff. But she was pretty much the person behind that from the beginning till the end. And I ended up leaving Vancouver shortly after that. After a couple of years of doing that festival, I was gone, and she was still there doing it. And then she even left Vancouver, went down to Austin, Texas, and worked at the Alamo Drafthouse for years.
Nice.
And programmed down there, and still traveled back and forth. And while that was happening, I went to Edmonton, and in Edmonton, I tried to do the exact same thing. I started another video store, and I started my own festival in Edmonton. And the same way that I had tried to introduce this weird cinema to Vancouver, I was this weird guy in Edmonton, and with this weird video store and starting this weird film festival, and the city had never kind of seen anything like that. And I think because Edmonton is a very different place than Vancouver, that city really embraced what I was doing at the time. And I was interviewed on the CBC. I was on the radio almost every week talking about different movies that were coming out. And so it really felt whereas in Vancouver, it was always a struggle to get people interested in a lot of these movies or these things that I was a part of. In Edmonton, it almost felt like it was like welcomed by the city. And so as much as I thought, Edmonton was a step back in a way towards coming back to Montreal, it was a real great time. I met a lot of great people, same thing, people I still connect with today. And I became quickly a part of a community in Edmonton. It happened really fast, whereas Vancouver took a long time to find those people. In Edmonton, it happened instantaneously.
Well then, wow, that's cool. I've never been to Alberta, so that sounds like a pretty cool
Yeah.
like culture they got there.
Well, I honestly, I think my experience in Alberta might be a very different experience than a lot of people. But it just so happened that because I went there and I opened up this video store, people that were into weird and subversive films kind of just came to me.
Right.
I was like a magnet for them. So all the people I would want to meet in Edmonton, I ended up meeting. So I was very lucky. But I think a lot of other people could go to Edmonton and have a very different experience, and probably have had a very different experience. And sadly, I was only there for a year. I ended up, at the time, I was dating a woman who traveled a lot for her job. And so after leaving Vancouver, every place I went to after that, I was only there pretty much for a year. So I was there for a year in Edmonton. I started a film festival, started a video store. 1 year later, sold the store again to a friend, and then I moved on. And I ended up then moving all the way to the other side of the country to Fredericton.
Oh,
Yeah. So strange enough, though, the person I sold the video store to in Edmonton and the film festival I started, unbeknownst to me, kept going. I knew the video store was still happening because I sold it to my friend Kevin Martin. And to this day, that video store is still there. And it's the last video store in Edmonton.
Oh my God, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah. It's called The Lobby. But I didn't know that he kept the film festival alive. I only found out a few years later because I ran into him at another film festival. And him and his partner, Derek Clayton, had kind of taken the film festival, kept it going, and then rebranded it as Dead Fest. And Dead Fest kind of became the genre festival of Edmonton for almost a decade. Up until maybe about a year or two ago, they kept that going strong every Halloween, brought in really cool movies, really cool guests, and introduced or kept introducing new cinema to Edmonton, you know?
Right.
And so when Kevin and I reconnected, probably actually now it's been about 5 or 6 years, I was thrilled to know that that was still happening. And as much as I wish I could have continued to stay in Edmonton because it seemed like the community was quite strong, I'm happy that I left and those guys were able to kind of take what I had started and really build off of it and turn it into something that I could never have imagined. The fact that the lobby is still there, the fact that Dead Fest became as popular as it was at the time, you know, like it's cool. It's very cool.
Now I'm curious because this is so interesting to me. I think most creative people, when they're like, oh, I want to, do something related to what I'm into,
Mhm.
they'll go, like write a script, make a movie, make some thing. You are like, I'll go start a film festival and I'll start a business. I'll start a video store. Talk me
Mhm.
through that.
Well, I think I had originally moved to Vancouver to become a screenwriter and possibly then even evolve into a director. Um, I had taken a script writing class by accident during college because all of the other courses I wanted were full, and the only available course was this class on screenwriting or TV production or something like that. I ended up having to write a script in that class, and by writing a script in that class, it really like sparked an interest in me to try and tell a story visually with dialogue and through camera work and through the idea of making TV or film. And so that happened at 18, and by 20, I was obsessed. I was obsessed with making films. I was shooting shorts almost every weekend with my friends. We had really crappy video cameras back then, shot on high-8 cassettes, so everything looked like garbage. We edited them on like two like VHS players. Like we would loop the VHS player into another VHS player, play it on one, hit record and pause on the other. It was garbage. It all looked like garbage, but that's how I ended up making my first couple of shorts. And at 20, I read that article about Vancouver. I moved out to Vancouver and I tried to just like throw myself into it. But very quickly, I found out how difficult it was to go from wanting to be a screenwriter or even just writing a script and actually getting it made at a level that kind of expressed exactly what you were trying to do. So, back then you had to kind of shoot on film. Video wasn't there yet quality wise. So finding out, someone who really knew how to use film, light it, expose it properly, which meant, of course, film itself, buying film, getting camera equipment, all of that stuff was really expensive. And because I moved to a new city, it took a long time for me to meet the people that kind of were doing that kind of stuff. In time, I did meet those people. I did manage to do a couple short films, but it was still never to the level that I really wanted or that I could potentially pull off at that time. And so I just looked at alternate routes I could take that still kind of kept me involved with film. And so, of course, working in the art department meant I could stay on film sets and still be somewhat creative. And then when I was a projectionist at that movie theater, well, I was like, I have free reign of this movie theater. I could watch any movie I want that we have, on 35 millimeter. I could project it for myself or project it for my friends, or, like watch it with a crowd of people. And then opening up my video store was like, I can now control the flow of which kinds of movies come into this city that I suggest to people, that I help promote myself. And so I just wanted to be involved in film any which way I could. I was even writing. I helped my friend Kayla again. She had a kind of like a magazine that she published, that she self-published at the time, called Cannibal Culture. So I helped with publishing that and writing for that magazine. We did that film festival together. I opened up that video store. I worked at that movie theater. I also worked on short films. I was just doing everything that I could to be immersed in cinema. And you know, once you start doing one thing, it leads you to another thing. Once you meet certain people, it leads you to something else. But as long as, for me, as long as I was surrounded by people that had an obsession with films the way I did, we were constantly moving in a similar direction. But once I ended up doing the video store and dating that woman who started, moving from city to city, it kind of just took me away from that and brought me to a new city where I tried to do it again and tried to help to do that with other people. Whereas in Vancouver, a lot of people helped me do it. In Edmonton, I tried to help a lot of people do it. And I think by opening up that video store in Edmonton and starting that film festival, and then, handing it over to Kevin, it kind of did create that community for certain like-minded people in Edmonton. And so filmmakers gathered around the store. Kevin ended up being part of a filmmaking team, and a couple of those guys, have gone on to do bigger and better things, moved to Vancouver, worked on bigger projects. Currently now, I think they're working on their first feature film. So that all came about because of that video store and that community in Edmonton. So I never let, the fact that I couldn't kind of break into film as a screenwriter or as a director stop me from trying to just be involved whichever way I could. I just kept trying to chase it in every direction to see what might come out of it. And a lot of times I just hit a brick wall, but sometimes something, and like a new path opened up, and that led to something interesting and different. And I might have only done that for a little while, but during that little while that I did it, I learned some really important things.
And were your parents all cool with this sort of stuff? Because, I'm also an immigrant, and, immigrant parents, usually they're like, get a real job.
Well, yeah, like my parents always tried to push me back to school. So I never went to university. When I was 18 or 19, I finished college in Montreal. Here we have a thing called CEGEP, which is like the in-between of high school and university. It's like in Ontario, it will be considered the last year of high school and the first year of university, because here high school ends at grade 11. And so CEGEP is like, it's like a college, and it's just kind of like something to do in between those two stages. But when I was done with CEGEP, I ended up applying to university. I didn't get in. And instead of sitting around, I didn't really know what to do. I just decided to move out to Vancouver. And so while I was doing that, I think both of my parents were very scared because, first of all, I left the nest. Second of all, I didn't have any family in Vancouver. I didn't really know anybody out there. And so they were always trying to be like, why don't you look at going to UBC, see what programs are available out there? Because getting that diploma will always benefit you. And they kept repeating the same kind of thing. I think that was probably repeated to them, or that they repeated to a bunch of people because they were both teachers.
Oh, okay.
So going to school for them was, I think, very important. My sister did it. Most of the people in my family did it. I seem to be the only one who never went to university, and I still haven't ever gone to university. I have taken some classes here and there. Like I went to that makeup school. That was just a diploma. Years later, when I did move back to Montreal, I went back to Concordia and took some adult ed classes on programming and stuff like that, because I had moved into a different direction at that point.
So did you go to high school with all this?
No, in high school, I honestly had no direction. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I was in a band, and so somehow I think I convinced myself that maybe I could be a rock star. I had long hair, played grunge guitar, and I was aimless. It was only in college because I accidentally took that television class that I had to write a script that I kind of found that it could be possible to work in film and television. Up until that point, I watched movies all the time. My father and I remember when I think the VCR was first introduced, my father went out and bought a VCR, and a video store opened up near our house. And so every weekend we would just go to the video store and rent movies. Sometimes we would rent 6 movies, and we would just spend the entire weekend watching movies, And so film was very important to me as a kid. Most of my friends, all we did when we got together, we either played video games or we watched movies. But it never occurred to me that people actually made those movies. You know what I mean? I never really thought
Yeah.
about the process of filmmaking. I just thought these things were manufactured somewhere and I got to see them. And so after I took that television class and I learned about screenwriting and, cinematography and lighting and editing, I realized, oh my God, this could actually be a career. And as soon as I realized that became my aim. I aimed at becoming a filmmaker. And when I moved to Vancouver, that was all I thought about. And that's why I surrounded myself with like-minded, kind of like cinephiles who obsessed with movies. In Vancouver, I either worked at a video store or a movie theater or on a film set. I didn't allow myself to have a different type of job. I was very lucky that I managed to get those types of jobs. Vancouver was very expensive, so I had to have a job. I could not afford to not make money because I had no money. My parents didn't give me any money to my parents aren't very rich. They were just kind of like middle class, lower middle class, where my father had a job. My mother pretty much was a homemaker for the majority of my life. She went back to teaching after I moved out. But I had to support myself out there. So I had to have a job, sometimes multiple jobs. Thankfully, there's a lot of video stores in Vancouver at the time. There were a lot of different movie theaters, and there were also a lot of sets that I could kind of just be a PA on or work my way up, and that's what I did. I was a PA. I worked my way up into the art department, but I pretty much stayed in the art department, and I never got further than that because it became, overwhelming to try and fight to get someone to read my script or to try and raise a bit of money to make a short film. I did manage to do it here and there, but it was really challenging. And so just working in the art department, I thought kind of like fulfilled a lot of what I needed, and I just stuck with it. And I kind of abandoned the idea of becoming a director or a screenwriter. I just wanted to work on films, and I thought I could do that and it would be fine. But even after a couple of years of that, I was really kind of disheartened to the whole idea of it and just left the film industry, worked at a movie theater, opened up a video store, and then I was very happy doing that. And for years, I didn't think about making a movie again. I just kind of became an entrepreneur, ran the video store, through the video store, learned how to build a website, then ended up selling the video store and going into web development.
Oh, so that was
And
your next phase.
that was the next phase. And as I left Edmonton, I ended up moving to Fredericton. In Fredericton, I decided to try and see if I could create a website and just, instead of having like a physical location for my video store, just create a website where I could sell DVDs online. And so in like
Whoa.
2004, 2005, I started an online business importing DVDs from around the world and selling them in Canada. I ended up having a lot of American clients as well, but I would just import stuff from all over the world, based in Fredericton, and I would sell it to anyone across Canada, anyone in the States. And even sometimes I even had clients in Australia and stuff like that, which was weird. But in order to maintain that online website, I had to actually learn how to code. I couldn't afford to hire someone to do it, and I might have been a bit stubborn too. So I just bought a book, learned how to write code, and then I ended up meeting a guy in Fredericton who happened to be a developer and who happened to develop some of the kind of like systems I was using for my website.
Yeah, like the CMS
Um,
stuff or
yeah,
whatever.
like, and so before WordPress or anything like that, there was something called like OS Commerce, which was like a content management system for selling products online. And so a guy who happened to be developing for that system lived in Fredericton, and I happened to meet him. And so he gave me a lot of pointers, and he helped develop my skills as a developer, as a programmer, as like a web designer, all of that stuff. He ended up even giving me my first job working as a web developer. And so as I was building that site, as I was running that business, I got to know this guy. His name was Chris Ross, and he ended up hiring me to work on a university website with him. And through that job, it forced me to really develop my skills quickly and push me further as a web developer than I would have been able to do on my own, or even going back to school and doing it. I ended up taking one course to just kind of like familiarize myself with JavaScript at the time. And then before I knew it, I had a job and I had a new career.
And that was within your 1 year in Fredericton.
Yeah, by the time, like, once again, 1 year in Fredericton was up, I moved on again. I went to Halifax. Um, and in Halifax, that's where a lot of things started to fall apart. The relationship fell apart. Um, the business I had started online, that's when kind of like Amazon really started taking off. A lot of businesses, even like Best Buy at the time, Future Shop, they started having a bigger online presence. eBay, at the time, as a Canadian, I was able to sell on eBay. But that year, they changed the way the shopping cart worked on eBay, and that change was only available to US sellers, and it totally killed my business.
Oh,
Yeah, it was really weird. It was because before you could only like bid on an item and add it, and like I think the bid was like an individual transaction. You couldn't add multiple items or buy nows or something like that. But
okay.
then they introduced a feature that allowed you to just do a buy now, like a shopping cart. And so you could add an item from my store, from anybody else's store, to your shopping cart, and then you could check out, and all the costs equated accordingly. But that was only available to US sellers. So because it was no longer available to me, a lot of my products weren't purchased. People just purchased through American sellers because it was more convenient. So that business kind of went bust. My relationship kind of went bust. I had connected with a filmmaker online, and we started a friendship, and together we decided to start a distribution label where we were going to manufacture DVDs. We were going to try and get the rights to a lot of films and put them out through DVD. And so he and I were working together the entire time I was in Halifax. And then that didn't kind of work out as well as we had hoped. Things were falling apart for me. And by, I think, 6 months in Halifax, I just decided to call quits on everything.
All right, we're going to end part one there. Kind of a cliffhanger, which I thought was, well, when I was editing this, it just kind of came naturally. Please give us feedback, comment, hit like, subscribe if you can, because it does help. So we know that someone's listening and it's not just me talking to myself into a microphone. And stay tuned for part 2 of Chris's interview, where we get into more recent history and the creation of Dead Dicks, which I think is a great story and just so inspiring. So yeah, look out for that episode next week, and thanks for listening.